Hello everybody, welcome to number 27, I'm Jack, and today I'm here to talk to you about this fantastic Saab 9000 Aero. Now, the 9000 is a really intriguing Saab because it has a really strong Italian influence. At the time, it was claimed to be faster than the range-topping Ferrari, yet it has an engine based on a British unit from the 1960s, and it has a very obscure link to the Muppets. Today, I'm going to be looking at all those claims and details in more depth, and of course, we'll take it out and see how it drives through today's lens. Thank you to Bidding Classics for sponsoring today's video. Check out this online auction for classic cars with no buyer's fees. So firstly, let's discuss a little bit the Italian angle that I mentioned. So there's two aspects to that. The design itself of the original 9000 was made by Giugiaro, really famous, very lauded Italian designer, and it was a really classic, very well proportioned design. This is the facelifted version. The facelift was actually done in-house by Saab itself, and I have to say, personally, I think it's one of the most, it ranks up there with the most successful facelifts of all time. It makes the car prettier, but yet, unlike most facelifts, it doesn't look out of place. It looks as if it was always designed to be like this. There is, though, another very significant area of Italian design for this car, and that is that the platform, known as the Type 4, is shared between Saab, Fiat, Alfa Romeo, and Lancia. So when Saab wanted to replace the 900, they obviously looked, times were always pretty lean at Saab, and they looked for ways of doing that, spending the least money possible. The best way to do that was a collaboration. Fiat at the same time was looking for one of its larger platforms, and they decided to produce this new one together. So the 9000, the Lancia Thema, the Alfa Romeo 164, and the quite horrible Fiat Chroma all share the same chassis. But there are some differences that I'm going to go into in a moment. One of the things to realise is the 9000 was the most expensive of the group of four cars. Indeed, in the US, it cost almost as much as a Lexus LS400, which must have made it quite a tough sell. So why then was it more expensive than the other cars, than its sister cars? Well, it may have used the same basic platform, but Saab being Saab, they insisted on making certain differences for the better. So for example, the doors had some quite hefty side impact beams that were absent in the Italian cars. Maybe not such a big deal there then, but Saab even insisted on re-engineering the front end to make it stronger and work better in an impact. Bizarrely, there's also changes to the suspension, and this I personally don't understand. I don't understand why Saab did this. So the Fiat Group cars had McPherson struts on all four corners, so not the most advanced suspension system, but at least it's independent all round. With the 9000, Saab went for McPherson struts at the front, but then they used a rear beam. Now, perhaps they did that because it's similar to the existing systems they were using on the 900, and they were quite happy to do that. But I would imagine that financially, there wouldn't have been much of a gain from that. And also technically, fully independent rear suspension is surely better than that rear beam. Now, let's discuss those wild claims about how fast the 9000s were. So with the original 9000 turbo, which was the 2-litre, this is the 2.3, the claim was that it was quicker than a Testarossa. How did they get away with saying that? Because clearly in most ways it wasn't quicker. But the measurement that they used is 50 to 70, which is a great real-world measure of how a car actually drives and how quick it is. And in fifth gear, from 50 to 70, the original 9000 turbo, which put out 195 horsepower, was actually quicker than a Testarossa, I think by 1.5 or 2 seconds. When this came out, which was the Saab Aero, so it was a 2.3 engine, it put out 225 horsepower. There was an advert from Saab, I'll put it up here, it's not very good quality, but it gives you an idea, where Saab themselves were claiming that in the same measurement, actually I think 50 to 75 in that case, in fifth gear, this was quicker than a Diablo, than an Aston Martin DB7 and the then current E36 M3. So Perhaps it's only on one measure that it is quicker than those cars, certainly not in top speed, and I think 0 to 60 as well, but it does give you a real world idea of the pace of these. And all the more astonishing because you can trace the origins of this Slant 4 to a 1960s Triumph engine. How did that happen? Well, Saab were looking to replace their current unit that they had at the time, and they approached Ricardo. The problem is they didn't have the budget for a full engine build. Ricardo told them, well, Triumph are producing a Slant 4 engine, which sounds like it's pretty well suited to what you're looking for. Saab then managed to get a deal with Triumph, bought a load of engines, and has eventually the rights to produce them. Now, of course, what you see here is very much changed and evolved from that 60s design, but you can still trace it to that. You can see here, it is still slanted forward. And obviously Saab pioneered turbo technology, anti-knock sensors. They used a trionic management system here, which was the first system that monitored the quality of the fuel that was going in the car. So big strides, but with quite an antique original design. So they were undoubtedly fast, but how do they drive? So it was during the last stage really of the 9000 that Saab was taken over by GM, which was the start of its slippery slide into, unfortunately, non-existence, which is where it is today. And that's really sad, but you can't quite blame the 9000 for it, as it was quite a successful car. It ran for an incredible amount of years, and out of the 4 models made, the Chroma, the Thema, the 164 and this was the highest seller. I think it was about 530,000 produced. The next highest selling car, in theory, which is just baffling to me, is the Chroma. But they were all sold in Italy. They were ubiquitous, they were everywhere. And also still horrible, really, with a Fiat Uno interior. So on the whole, a success, and it was a great car. It is quite incredible to think that it was competing with an LS400 in the US, and it must have been quite a tough sell. It did have the Saab heritage and name to rely on, and of course there was some extra engineering, as I already mentioned, in comparison to the Italian cars. It was also a very fast car. So the BMW, the 535, this was actually faster, cheaper, and had better fuel economy. So, you know, in many ways, although it was expensive, it still wasn't bad value in comparison to what you were getting to other similar propositions. So the climate control system it's a Saab proprietary system, but it was used in the Lancia Thema as well. So I remember it from my dad's cars, and it was much criticised for being quite fiddly, lots of small buttons and so on. Before we talk about more, let's just do a pull. So first gear, lots of wheel scrabble, second gear. Very smooth for a 4-cylinder. So first thing you noticed is the seats are fantastic. These are Recaros. Now I said that there was a link to the Muppets for this car, for the 9000 and the 900 that preceded it. That is actually to do with the non-Recaro seats, the standard Saab seats, which were, by all accounts, inspired from the Muppets in space. And you can see the similarity between the designs. But just for this car, they got Recaro to design some seats, and they are fantastically comfortable. They look great. I mean, the standard seats are pretty good as well, to be quite honest, but that is a distinguishing factor of the Aero. One of the first things that you'll notice is the good old-fashioned hydraulic steering. It is great on this. I'm quite surprised by just how good it is. It's really easy to place the car, it's super responsive, it's got precision to it, and it's got fantastic feel. Now this wheel may look like an aftermarket item, but actually it was an option available with the Aero, so it's one of 2 wheels that came with the car. I don't know if it's slightly slower than the standard one. Maybe it kind of helps, slightly slower, slightly smaller than the standard one. Maybe it helps feel the car even a little bit more agile, but in any case, I can tell you the front end just feels great. Really, really good. Perfect weighing as well. It just reminds you how crappy some of the modern systems are, really. The gear shift is really light and crisp, if perhaps a little bit longer in shift than would be ideal for me, but really nice to use. It's quite softly sprung. I do believe maybe you can feel a bit of a difference between this and the other group cars in terms of the way the back end feels tiny, maybe a little bit more bouncy, but I'm not 100% sure. I haven't driven one of the other cars for a while. The engine on this it has that turbo boost, and I have to say this car in particular has a little bit of an ace up its sleeve because Paul, who owns it, runs the Saab clinic, and he remaps 9000s. So this particular one, you might have noticed, obviously there's a little, that would be a giveaway, there's a little turbo gauge there, which is obviously not standard. So this particular car puts out 310 horsepower or 315, basically about 100 horsepower more than the standard car. And even with that amount of power, it's really pretty good. Now Paul's done some quite trick programming though. So for example, he's limited the boost in the first gears. I think first, second and third, it's slightly limited. Right, let's go. So first gear, a lot of wheel spin. Second gear, just hit the limiter. Paul has lowered it to 5.5, I think, from 6. He had warned me about that. And this thing really is rapid. To be honest, the standard cars are really pretty quick as well, but this is obviously on another level. I'm surprised how well it keeps it all in check. At the limit, the body does start to move around, but that excellent steering really allows you to place it quite accurately and just sort of thread it through the bends. For a front driver, it's great. Gives you a lot of confidence. There isn't much of a sign of understeer. And also, yes, there's a little bit of torque steer, but it's not mental, and there is more grip at the front than I would have thought. If you do continue to push on in the tighter corners like this one, physics will prevail and it will wash into gentle understeer. Back end doesn't really seem to come into play. It's just there. It doesn't ever feel like it's going to misbehave. Handles the bumps on this road really, really well. Actually, the quicker you go, the better it feels in terms of ride. It's quite a fluid car. Now, I love the way the sort of interior dash is sculpted. Got an aftermarket head unit on there. Also, this has been covered in carbon. Originally, it would have been either a matte black for these Aeros, or it would have been a maple wood, which I think this one was. Current owner Paul didn't like that, so he's wrapped it. But the way it's sculpted and cut through, I think looks, I don't know, it does still have that Saab feel. It's interesting that because they had to use that joint architecture, this is the first car in which Saab moved the key from the side here next to the gear stick in the traditional position next to the wheel. So Paul's programmed it, so obviously it limits torque in the first, second and third gear, which I think is entirely necessary. The other crazy thing about it though is he can still get 40 miles to the gallon, which, I don't know, for a car with this performance and for this age is incredible. So the 9000, the Aero, the turbos in particular, are really sort of a significant part of Saab's history. I don't think I would be pilloried if I said this is the last sort of real Saab. Yes, it had some sort of Italian input as well, but really Saab were truly still able to maintain their stamp on it. And after that, it all went GM. It wasn't the finest time in Saab's history. So really engaging character, really interesting car. Really glad that I drove it today, and it handles better than you would think. For a front drive saloon of the time, it's pretty impressive. And although he's had the engine fettled, he's reprogrammed it, obviously it's what he does, the chassis is completely standard in terms of the shocks and springs and all that kind of stuff. So this is how how they would have driven. Very impressive. It's funny because I recently did a video on an E36 M3, which was really possibly the most hated of the M's, and was running concurrent to this being a 97 car, but out from 93. If you're interested in finding out more about that, have a look at that video and see how it contrasts with this. Thank you so much for watching. If you have a car that you'd like me to do a review on, then please contact me either by email or Instagram is probably the best way. Thank you so much and see you soon.